So the concept is the following. Whenever we declare variables, like for example, here I have this variable count equals 10. This variable is visible to all functions. And functions, like for example, if I do this here, I have this function print count. So where does it get count from? So the idea is that a function, when it needs to access a variable, looks inside the function to see if you've defined count anywhere inside the function. If it doesn't find this variable inside the function, it goes outside the function and it looks for count. And then if it finds it outside, it will print it. Otherwise, it will throw an error saying, I can't find count anywhere. And I just want to show you what does, if I run this just to visualize what's inside Python. If you see first in the global frame. So this is a global view. In the global view, a variable called count gets defined. And now when function gets created, locally in the function, there is no count variable anymore, right? So when it needs to run, it actually goes and it finds it in the global scope. So you see this function will look in the global scope and find 10, and it actually ends up printing 10. Okay. Now, if you define locally a variable called count, then you will get. So let's just write some. Let's just write another example. So you take the same thing. If I define locally a variable, and let's say count equals 20. Now what will happen? Now it will look locally. You see here, locally it has a variable 20. So if I run this program now, then it will actually print out. Okay, so let's just run it. So in the global frame, there's a variable called count with the value 10. But locally, there's when it gets created, the function gets created locally, there's a variable called 20. You see count equals 20. So when print is called, it will pick up the local variable. See, it prints out 20. Okay. So this idea is called scoping, right? And it tells you in what scope of a set of values get defined. So for example, count here with the value 20 is defined within the scope of my function. Count here with the value 10 is defined outside in the global scope. So this is a source of many tricky bugs. Okay. So I just want to tell all of you, be very mindful of where variables get defined. Initially, when we are programming, it's very tempting to leave variables in global scope and just read them. Your function will not throw an error. It will just read it from global scope. But it's always better if this function needs access to this variable count, it's better to make it a parameter, right? So what I'm saying is, if it needs exactly this variable, it's better to make count into a parameter and then pass it in. And now, of course, when I call this function, I have to pass in the variable. And now this global variable will get passed locally, and we'll be very clear in our contract for the function that I need this variable to be given to me. Okay. So always just a general guideline for you, always understand where values are coming from, preferably within a function, only access things that are defined locally, even though Python will allow you to access globally. By the way, if you try to modify this function, so if you do count plus equals 1, which is defined in global scope, it will throw an error. Right. So if I try to run this function, oh, sorry, let me just start again from the beginning. So I try to run this function. See that? Oh, I passed it in as a parameter. No, sorry. If it's a global variable, I got to take this out too. If it's a global variable and I try to modify it, then it will throw an error. So let's see. So now it comes inside the function, tries to modify it, and you see, it gives me an error. Now there is a way, I don't want to tell you this, but I'll tell you this. There is a way to allow you to modify global variables by using a keyword called global. But I don't want you to develop this practice, so let's not even go there. Okay, I just wanted to show you that there is a way to do this. It's not a good, at least I don't like it as a programming practice. So always, if you need access to something, pass it in as a parameter. Okay. Again, the value of this statement will only be clear at some later stage in full glory. But for now, it's important to highlight that where things are defined is very, very important.